Namaste everyone. Welcome to Author Q&A, our fortnightly program by Indic Book Club, an initiative of Indic Academy. At Indic Academy, we are committed to celebrating our civilization, the continuum that has been sustaining us since millennia, and we are proud of who we are. And Indic Book Club focuses on celebrating Indic literature and philosophy. We have a vibrant Facebook group as well as budding author groups and reader groups everywhere. So please join us and be a part of very meaningful conversations happening, celebrating the same. And today we have a guest author, Kaninika Mishra. So welcome, a very warm welcome, Kaninika.
Thank you.
So guys, Kaninika Mishra, born in Jamnagar, Gujarat, and grew up in different parts of India. She holds a bachelor's degree in homeopathic medicine and arts, as well as a master's degree in management from Queensland University of Technology, Australia, and East Carolina University, US. Kaninika has worked in the financial sector of India for several years and now heads learning and development. I know it's her area of passion in a leading communications firm in Gurgaon. Her best-selling book, The Indian Millionaire Next Door, published in 2012, contains inspiring accounts of the professional journeys of India's top financial advisors and has been translated into Hindi and Tamil. So Kaninika, warm welcome again. And today we are discussing Kaninika's recent book, The Indic Quotient, which celebrates the journey of 24 entrepreneurs who are reclaiming heritage through cultural enterprise. So the blurb of the book reads this way: over the past decade, India has seen a significant rise in both passion for enterprise and pride in heritage. That is one unique combination that I guess we are seeing only in India, Kaninika. And with the two converging to form successful ventures and imaginative social initiatives centered around Indic areas. I have to agree there because we are a civilization that has understood the natural cycle of Srishti, Sthiti, Laya before the rest of the world could even grasp the word sustainability, which has become pretty much a buzzword these days. So in Indic Quotient, Kaninika Mishra celebrates the effort of ordinary Indians as they reclaim their native identity with ingenuity, form a team of economists working to put long forgotten millets on urban Indian plates, to a group of art enthusiasts attempting to bring back stolen artifacts from museums abroad, from an investment banker formulating Ayurveda-inspired beauty products to a former engineer working to revive traditional textiles in Assam, and many more. With intimately told stories of dynamism and entrepreneurship, the book tries to examine the relevance of traditional wisdom and culture in modern India and what they mean for India's economic future and soft power, what they mean to you, me, and every Indian, and probably every global citizen across the globe. So Kaninika, a warm welcome again.
Thank you.
And tell us more about you and what made you undertake this journey of going through these unique journeys.
Thank you, Sai Swarupa. It's a pleasure to be here with the Indic Book Club and talk to all the members in this vibrant community about my book. My journey began around 4.5, 5 years ago. And the interest in Indian heritage began like several people when I was grappling with a certain minor health issue, and I turned to yoga and turned to Ayurveda. And I realized that there was so much happening in this area. My perception towards yoga changed when I started going to a class. And I live in Gurgaon, and it's a very urban, cosmopolitan place. And I did not expect to find so many committed young people who were in the class working, practicing yoga. And along with it, they were so open to holistic medicine, towards khadi, towards using home remedies. And the whole lifestyle seemed to me very different from what we assume in a very urban and a very, very modern cosmopolitan city. And they were people like you, me, and they were just so eager to use parts of their heritage. Now, around that time, around 5-6 years ago, also from the government, there was this push for Make in India. There was this idea to revive cultural aspects of our past. And I found that there were so many entrepreneurs who were working with such ideas, especially with the Ayush Ministry, the International Day of Yoga, and all these initiatives were coming together, and it was like a social movement. The more I dug into it, the more I read about it, I could see stories in mainstream economic newspapers like Economic Times saying the growth of khadi products, the sale of khadi products has gone up. And I could see a lot of people starting chain of yoga studios, some very fancy, some still small scale. And I started thinking of this as a movement, which I thought it is. I just grew from an idea that I thought I will cover something around yoga because I was benefiting from it. And it just started gathering more and more things as I started discovering so many parts of our heritage, which I thought were now getting back into the mainstream. So the unique thing, like you said, about our culture is that we are a lived civilization. We are a continuously lived civilization. We are not relics of the past. We have not died out like some of the indigenous cultures. And so we may get a little lost sometimes, but we will not forget that turmeric is good for us. So we may not use it at our homes, but even the most urban, most sophisticated, most westernized Indian would know that turmeric is good for health. And that is, I think, something that is so deep within us. It is so much of a part of our lives. And that is why it has sustained. Our whole culture has become a part of our everyday life. And I found that with all the new initiatives that were coming up, it was getting back. A lot of people who had forgotten, maybe their grandmothers used to use certain food products, some health foods, and they were forgotten, but the familiarity was there, and there were these individuals who were now bringing it back to them in a packaged form, easy to use, maybe in marketing it in a more cool way for young kids. So I think that was something that I wanted to discover and write about. So that is where this whole thing started.
That's wonderful, and I must say soulful also, something coming from your experience and which you transformed into a whole journey that became this beautiful book.
Right.
So, Kaninika, because you have basically made wonderful use of your knowledge of the financial sector and about entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship, economics, and merged it with your area of passion, that is, the cultural heritage. Right, and in many traditions across the globe, there is a certain decoupling between principles and what they hold as ethos from commerce.
Yes.
Right. And in India, we have this very unique balance, probably because we are again that one unique civilization which celebrates dharma, artha, kama, moksha at the right time, at the right phase of life of an
Yes.
individual.
Yes. Yes.
So, what according to you, separates an Indic enterprise from capitalist enterprise, for the lack of better word?
Okay. Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And the answer to this was apparent to me when I spoke to several people, interviewed several people engaged in this common endeavor to revive or reclaim heritage. And I found that the starting point from where they were beginning was very different from the motivation for a regular entrepreneur. So all of these people, and everybody I spoke to, the first thing that they, and I will give you an example to illustrate this. Somebody who was starting, who has built a big business around Ayurvedic based cosmetics, his first idea to begin it was when he visited the Himalayas and he started seeing the Ayurvedic herbs there. And he was overwhelmed by the fact that the little farmers, who have small land there, they knew so much about these herbs growing in their backyard, and the fact that they were so important for the sustainability of that region from an economic point of view, and that motivated him to make these products and sell them. So the starting point was not a marketing idea. And across, most of the people that I've interviewed, for them, the starting point has been one of reviving heritage, one of building something that has community impact, something that helps people. So even the textile I have covered in my book, the whole textile initiative, everybody that I have spoken to who are trying to work in this handloom area, they are driven by this huge thing of preserving heritage and helping communities who are doing it. So how do you preserve an art form? You preserve an art form by ensuring that the community which is doing it is getting sustainable income and is able to meet their needs, and that itself becomes a social enterprise. So the whole concept, as far as these companies, these organizations are concerned, is one driven towards a mission. And when you have a mission which is beyond money, because you can make a business, you can start any kind of shop and make money, but for them it's a mission for preserving, for promoting, for enhancing something that is a part of our heritage. So the starting point itself is, I feel, different from the other, purely business endeavors, business enterprises. But I must add that the method may be a little different. So I have, in my book covered a company, a group of people who are working with small farmers who are growing indigenous crop, the millets like the ragi and the bajra, there are those indigenous crop in each area, and they have been a part of a staple diet before the Green Revolution came and, everybody started eating wheat and rice. We all had different grains. Now, this company, they don't want to get into venture funds. They don't want to get somebody investing. And the reason they don't want it is because they don't want to go away from this mission where they are promoting small farmers. So they very clearly, they say that we are not ready to sacrifice a social idea, our social aspect of our business for funds. So we will continue to put in whatever we can in terms of effort or bootstrap our business in order to meet our goals, which is the triple bottom line. It is not just profitability, it is planet, it is people, and it is profit. So, that is one aspect. The other is very new age digital startup in Ayurveda, very open to funding and very open to different rounds of funding. But this entrepreneur, he has started this Ayurveda digital platform out of his personal experience of benefiting through Ayurveda. When he had a problem and he found the access to doctors was difficult, so he started this digital platform. And he told me, he went in for funding. He got his second round of funding. It was great, huge. But he comes from a small town. He has been a sharecropper, which means he's not even from a land-owning family from Bihar. And he says, I understand that how people are underprivileged in many parts of India. So I use that money not to move into a big swanky office. I'll continue with my small bare office. I'll increase salaries. That's what I want to do. So, the idea of where you're coming from, what is your mission and motivation, on the way their methods may be a little different, but their driving force, I think, is mostly towards the betterment, towards social impact, towards the whole concept of people, planet, and sustainability, because of just the mission that they are looking at.
Thank you for that very soulful recollection, because that's where exactly the word sustainability is present in action, and in that thought, word, and action, what we call as Trikarana Shuddhi, in selecting to be in choosing to be in a humble office.
Yes.
As opposed to a grand office,
yes.
which we use for marketing and all that.
Yes.
So that brings me to the next question. How did you go about identifying such people? Because as far as I can gather, most of them don't seem to be enjoying any media presence or coverage or even connections, I doubt. So how did you go about identifying these cultural entrepreneurs?
So,
and how did you basically separate the genuine from the not so genuine ones? Because it's so easy to portray oneself to be an activist, to be a climate change, that's the buzzword, to be a climate change evangelist or whatever. So it's so easy to claim, climb up a moral pedestal and, keep lecturing people these days, especially in this era of social media. But these people that you covered, especially I liked the sections, the Green Knights and the temples and sentinels. I mean, I loved all the sections, including the one on me. But what I see is very unique among these people is that they are not claiming those moral pedestals and lecturing there. They are someone who deeply understand the ways of life right at the ground level. And instead of preaching, each of them have chosen to galvanize a small change that could cause a ripple effect, that they hope to cause a ripple effect and make this planet better. So how did you go about identifying these people?
So, Sai Swarupa, as you mentioned, you are also in my book. And I chanced upon you in one of the events that I was attending. yes. And in IIT, and I heard you talk. And I realized that the passion that you brought into your work, and how you, from being from a different background, took this up as a calling and used all the knowledge that you had while growing up to put together these series of books that could acquaint people to our ancient Puranic literature. And not just that, the whole idea of feminism and women rights, and how from our perspective in our culture, as is very sustainable, is more, I think, equal, and is directed at a more positive path forward than how it is in the Western world. And I think that such inspirations I was lucky to find with a lot of people I met. Of course, there have been many people who I did not cover in the book for various reasons. My number one, so I had two main criteria for filtering, if we can call this
I can
filtering.
understand.
So one was the social impact that people were making with their work. So it was not just, like I said, a business venture, and there are many who are doing that as well in this space. So there are a lot of people who are looking at it as the new trend. So if there are a lot of Ayurveda based products coming out, okay, let me also start one and make some money. But I was looking at people who are genuinely inspirational, and that was through the social impact that they are doing with their work with the employees or the region that they're working in. So that was one criteria that I looked at. So if I look at textiles, then there are several entrepreneurs who are working genuinely to promote the specific region, the craft of that region, rather than just be a marketplace where they are just sellers and buyers and, you know, just put the products on and get a profit or a margin from that. So that was one criteria. The second criteria, which was slightly more from a business perspective, was also innovation. And I thought that it was important for people at profile in the book to have something different, something that differentiates them from the mass that that is coming up. And that was also driven by a vision that a lot of them have. So it could be either new ways of marketing themselves, or getting across to people, or technological platforms that they were using. So I looked at both these dimensions, and my number one thing was just to have people who could inspire me. And I think that if I felt inspired, I thought surely my readers would feel that too. So I was really very sure that I want people who had an inspirational story, something that was more about the mission, the purpose they had, rather than looking at it as business.
That's that's a lot of thought and even heart and soul put into the whole process. I'm feeling inspired by your journey of identification, identifying these guys now. So people, Kaninika has, made some interesting categories of these cultural entrepreneurs. She has chronicled the journeys of yoga entrepreneurs, Ayurveda entrepreneurs, and the eyewear handloom. She calls it hashtag eyewear handloom. The entrepreneurs who celebrate traditional weaves and also make an enterprise out of it. The Green Knights, I hope to focus a bit more on them. Rekindle, that celebrates entrepreneurs who are bringing back the past, the glorious past of India, back to popular imagination. That's where my humble story is also included. So thank you, Kaninika, for that. And there's Soul Food and Temple Sentinels. It's so difficult to identify one favorite amongst all these. So each of the journeys is so unique, and there's something to take away. That way, this book makes a very, I don't want to say it's a slow read, but it's a very impactful read for anybody who is just starting out in life, or, irrespective of the phase of life they are in. The book is a great companion, a very impactful companion that stays with you. So, Kaninika, before we go into the categories, each of these categories, could you share a bit about your publishing process? Because I have not heard a lot of books coming into this genre. So the publishing itself might have been a journey, and also Indic Book Club mentors and tries to bring together a lot of aspiring authors who would be watching our conversation right now, or who would catch this on YouTube later. So something that would help them to get together their process.
So I was in my mind sure that I would not think of publishing till I write the book, because I wanted to not get affected by the demands of the publishing industry, which is very specific towards a certain kind of writing, unfortunately. Though it is changing now, and I see that publishers are open to new ideas and different ideas. But yes, while I was writing, I was aware that a subject which celebrates, and this is so unfortunate, Sai Swarupa, that a subject which celebrates India, or a subject that celebrates the Indian civilization or our Hindu ethos, if I can just call it that, is not a positive story about that is not regarded as interesting as something which is negative. So you can get more access to publishing in case you write something negative than if you write something positive. And that's something that I didn't want to bind myself with. I wanted to write what I saw as a change, a phenomena that was occurring, where Indians, young people like us, after the entire colonial period, the period of slow economic growth, which they termed as the Hindu rate of growth, for some reason, the whole liberalization process, and finally a self-assured young Indian who felt that they could actually own their own clothes, their own attire, their own food without feeling apologetic. And I thought this was a story which had to be told. And I was so conscious that this was not something that a publisher would be readily able to pick up. So I didn't want to, have that in my mind. I went ahead with curating all these stories and bringing that new idea, that new theme that I thought was not mentioned earlier. And fortunately for me, I contacted several writing literary agents, and many turned me down as well. I found access through one to a publisher, and I thought that they realized that you cannot stop an idea which has seen its time. I mean, there's an idea whose time has come. We have seen this. We are seeing this. There is a change in the way people think about India now. There's a change in how we think about our heritage now. And I feel with the whole turmeric latte getting global, and yoga becoming fashionable, there is an acceptance with young people that they don't feel demoralized to do things which are a part of their heritage. It's a very positive movement. These ideas have the potential to impact not just individuals, but communities. And if I can share that when we talk about yoga, usually in the West, it is a very elitist and urban upper middle class phenomena, where you have these swanky yoga studios, or you have smaller studios. It is done with a lot of movement and high energy kind of thing. Most places there, what I have studied. But in India, we have even a small individual yoga teacher so open to going to a municipality school, and in their free time teaching yoga to the kids to help them meditate. And the whole idea of yoga here is different. We have now started accepting it, and I see that's such a positive thing. There would be a little commercialization. I agree. There are a lot of critics which talk about commercializing of things and all that. There would be that, but I see at the core, even the most commercial of enterprises in heritage have such a deep connection with their own history, their own legacy. And that's something that I really wanted to write. I thought that the publisher could see that passion, and they did not ask me to alter anything in my book. I must commend them for accepting the idea as well as the writing. And how I have so unabashedly and so forthrightly claimed that these are aspects of our Indian Indic culture, which to me is synonymous with Hinduism. And there is absolutely no bones to make about that. So I am very glad that I could say all that. And I feel so satisfied that I could. And it's come out in print like the way I intended it to.
Sure, sure. So that's very happy to note that the readiness of this one publisher, Bloomsbury, right?
Yeah, Bloomsbury, yes.
I know. I mean, the editing process is very professional with them, and you don't feel the intrusion upon the content, and there's a whole. So that's how editing needs to be. That seeks to highlight the author's original thought without applying some kind of
Agenda.
narrative intelligence or or even market intelligence upon that. That's what gives rise to unique pieces of literature, if I may say, Kaninika. So now, before I go to my next question, the participants can type in their questions in the chat window, and Kaninika would be very happy to take them on. And if you don't
Sure.
have questions, I'm very, very happy, to have my extra 15 minutes to ask her, because this is one conversation which I can, enjoy
Same here,
lots of
Saiswarupa.
time. So, Kaninika, one of my favorite categories among your all the sections that you have chronicled these cultural entrepreneurs is the Green Knights. Each of these entrepreneurs, again, as you said, comes from a deep mission,
Yes.
deep commitment to a mission, and whatever change that they want to see in around them, like the lady who was very disturbed with the river pollution.
Yeah.
And started a sustainable enterprise of her own, right? One thing again I want to emphasize is that entrepreneurship, as someone who has also worked with entrepreneur startups and venture capital, entrepreneurs share that passion to bring change in action without guilt tripping the world around them, right? So how was each of these journeys when you chronicled each of these Green Knight entrepreneurs? So how were they different from these activist, climate change activist kind of people who claim that moral dies and keep on guilt tripping every person? Because even on social media,
Yes.
I
Yes.
see, I mean, just, forget those five-star activists, but even on social media, there is a lot of unnecessary virtue signaling and not enough actionable content.
Absolutely.
There is some kind of an outrage manufactured against, say, some road initiative, some infrastructure initiative, or a factory somewhere, or something, and that effectively blocks a lot of economic activity. And at the end of the day, there is no solution to the existing problem of the economic stalling that has happened in that. So how do you see the solution is? I mean, I want to hear about, from you about the whole solutionism that has guided the Green Knights in your book.
Yes. So in my chapter, Green Knights, and you've read Sai Swarupa, I have written about a small farmer in Uttarakhand, a female farmer who has a small land holding. Now, for her to access, to get, not just be environmentally sustainable, not use fertilizers.
So, Kanika, sorry to interrupt you there. So please feel free to take names of these people, because
Sure.
I feel proud to give a platform to such people,
Sure.
and those viewing the program, you please go through the whole book. Google about these entrepreneurs, and you can probably, if you can buy their produce, or
Products.
whatever.
Yes.
So So do please feel free to take their names and
Yeah, so this entrepreneur which started this company Soul Tree, I talked about that in your a few minutes ago when we were talking as well. He was a merchant navy sailor, and he went to the Himalayas because he was so driven by sustainability and environment. But when he went there, he realized that the only way to help these people, which is a small woman farmer in Uttarakhand somewhere with a small land holding, is to buy their products. Because otherwise, how do you help them? If you don't give, if you give them money or grants, how far can it go? And they are also people who want to live a life of dignity. And the only way that you can help these people in a sustainable fashion is to connect it with enterprise, to connect it with business. So there are a lot of NGOs which work there, and they purchase some of the products from there. There are businesses which get connected to the NGOs and buy the products from the NGO, or there is direct link that the business person can have with a few farmers. But usually the route is through some non-governmental organizations which are helping these farmers collecting their produce. For example, amla, the Indian gooseberry, which is used in a lot of our products. It's used in Chavanprash. It is used in a lot of our products. Now, these trees, they are there with the small farmer somewhere in a remote village, and that farmer is collecting like kilos of that on a yearly basis. But how does that person reach the market? So this connection, this wonderful connection, happens through business. This is the only way that you can safeguard that environment. So you give them a little premium because it's organic, and tell them that, okay, do not use fertilizers, give them an organic tag, and then use that too. And it's such an interesting story with this, because in the late 90s or early millennium, when this person, Mr. Bhandari, he started this business of cosmetics, he did not make those products in India. He just used them, powdered them, made it into a raw material to be supplied to Europe for them to use it in their cosmetics. And this idea of having his own brand came when he realized that he was dependent, that little farmer was dependent on the purchasing demands of European people. And that European person would buy 1 month, not buy the other month, maybe buy something 1 year, next year may not buy. But the poor farmer is dependent on the fickle mind of somebody who's not connected with them. And that is where his whole idea to start his own brand came, that, okay, let me have a brand where every year I have to buy something from this person, make them, make it sustainable for them as far as the income is concerned. And also for me, I can use my business marketing skills to promote the product and gain a market, So it is a very nice combination. I don't think that in today's economy, we can go without exploiting the marketing and using marketing to gain new customers. We have to do that, and if we can benefit people along the way, we can benefit some of these small farmers who are growing all these herbs and using that ingredient for the products, which is good for our skin and is healthy. That's a win-win situation.
So that's so relevant, and this win-win attitude or win-win initiative is what we see missing in an organization that we know is about to go down. So that I won't mention those big companies right now, but as somebody who has studied business, we know that whoever has fallen has had a phase where somehow some selfish interest has overtaken a larger cause, and there's a natural death of the product. The whole life cycle of the product expires when this kind of selfishness overtakes. I know there may be a brief burst of success because of those initiatives and marketing and whatever the greed they have and the greed they inspire in others around them. There might be a burst of short-term success, but as you said, the sustainability comes with that win-win attitude.
Yes.
And with that, let me go to my next question about the other favorite category of mine, that is the temple sentinels. Because it's now, uniting culture with enterprise is something, uniting yoga, Ayurveda, and, even handlooms, because we are somehow consumers of those area. But what inspired these temple entrepreneurs? This thing, because we go to pray and somehow there is somewhere in deep consciousness we have separated commerce from temples again, because every time somebody goes to a temple with a gap of 20 years, they come and say, yeah, that place is too commercialized, it doesn't feel that I don't get the feeling of that bhakti when I go to, say, this particular pilgrimage center now and all. But, I don't personally agree with such statements that has, something to do deep within us. But what was your reading of people of these categories, and what did you find inspiring about each of them? And let me say, my favorite is Temsitla in song, uh, who I found so inspiring that she ended up being a character in one of my novels.
That's really amazing, Sai Swarupa, to hear that she is inspiring people who are writing fiction as well, and it's definitely her story is inspirational because she took on this challenge of cleaning the ghats in Varanasi, and to ensure that people who come there get a more cleaner environment, because that is such a spiritual place for us. Now, to answer your question about why I included and how I look at these the temples that I visited, I have seen across many temples in India that while we look down upon commercialization, several of these temples have patronized art forms for years, for centuries. And that is in the South. If you look at the Tanjore paintings, which
Yes.
are today, a commodity which is bought and sold, and that is probably what makes it survive. So in today's times, without a little commercial angle, I doubt that something can survive, because we do not have kings who can patronize. We do not
Yes.
have, and social organizations come with their own handicaps. Donors come with their own agendas. And that is why, unless something gets democratized in a way that it reaches people through enterprise, it reaches people through a commercial venture, it risks, the possibility of it getting extinct becomes a little high. So in my view, if we look at some of these temples like the Pichwai paintings near Udaipur, or if we look at some of the other art forms that are there with a lot of temples, some artists or some business minded individuals who are using it to promote that art are actually doing a great service. Yes. And it just helps the economy of the temple. It helps that town survive. So if we look at Kashi itself, the fact that Varanasi has seen this rejuvenation is because there are more people visiting. The small vendor there finds a livelihood. He doesn't need to migrate out in search of livelihood. And that is what makes the city living. So we may look at the crowds and say it's losing a piece of that place, but imagine if it was the other way around and there was nobody. I mean, how would that place survive? How would that place get that element? And who is the one to decide the balance? I think we need to understand that preservation is a goal good enough in itself. We need to be we need to ensure that a balance is maintained, but demonizing tourism or demonizing commercialism may not be the solution. So in my view, I see that with Varanasi, the whole rejuvenation is adding so much to the life of, one person. There is one person who works with Temsutla, a young boy. And I met him there on the ghats. He took me on the boat. He showed me Varanasi, and there was so much pride. Imagine, and he said, I can never imagine 5-10 years ago that Varanasi would change and this place would feel hope. It was a decaying kind of a place, it was getting dirty. There was nobody looking at it. Now there is a new spirit. There is a new life. And that is what we want. We want that hope to be there so that these individuals don't tomorrow go to a Bangalore or a Mumbai and say there is nothing in our culture that is worth appreciating. Because it's easy to, get, when you find no economic opportunities, it's easy to then say that there is nothing that's coming out good from, my heritage. If there are no economic opportunities, people tend to, and that's happened with us before the economic liberalization and our confidence in being self-reliant. We were looking at others for helping us out in economic situations across the world. And it does impact your self-confidence, your sense of identity. So I think economics is important for us to retain a certain self-identity. We need to ensure that our temples are places of economic success in some way so that they can inspire other people as well.
Sure. So that's, it just shows that you have really gone on the ground to record each of these experiences and they have resonated with you, Kaninika. So I cannot stop appreciating the whole initiative there. And coming to the temples, I remembered a certain scholar opine that a temple, from the whole, there is a component of prana pratishtha and the deity being there. But a temple is also a real temple if it can sustain a minimum of 10 families around it. The bigger the temple, the bigger is the number of families it can sustain, and the bigger is the chunk of economy it can sustain by itself. And that is an economy which does not have lows or highs. I mean, the pandemic has caused its own ravaging of that whole this one. But as it is, temples are something that sustain a lot more of economy and population than we think they do.
Yes.
So that's that's one reason why I wanted to appreciate your.
If I can add this, they also sustain the animals and they also sustain biodiversity. So the success of a temple with it getting a prominent place in pilgrim's map is important for the other creatures which live in that temple, and I've written that in my book about this temple in Assam. Which is which has brought back this extinct species of turtles, because in that pond, it's a Haigriva Madhav temple, which is in Hajo near Assam. It's an hour away from Guwahati, and the temple has a pond, and it is you cannot kill any creature because it's a holy pond near the temple. So that there is one species which was thought to be extinct of turtles, and they have found that species over there. An ordinary man who is a parking attendant and a caretaker in that of that pond has helped to incubate these eggs of the turtle, because he started finding that these turtles were dying. So he found that there was a wall which was causing the problem in breeding, and he took it upon himself. He is a case study in environmental preservation, and he is a simple man, a devotee, who is just going by the concept that all creatures need to be revered. And this is something which I find so fascinating. because the now when the devotees come, because it has become on the ecological map, there's a special food that they ask the person. So there's a place you can buy the turtle food, not give them biscuits and bread and all that. And the devotees are buying that. There's a little vendor who's selling it. And they are feeding the turtles the special feed, which is good for them. So there's an entire sustainable ecological project going on there in a small temple somewhere in a corner. And that's so amazing about our culture. And these are stories we must talk about with our kids and with our families, so that they understand that we are a part of such a system, such a legacy that it needs to be preserved for humanity.
Exactly. That's thank you for sharing that story. It's something I think I'm going to remember for long. Makes me prouder about each of the temple that that exists on this land. Maybe we don't know the whole basket of benefits that a temple brings in. And then there are these half-baked movies and narratives against temples and all. So
Yes.
I just doubt if any of them have even done a ground level study on how a temple can positively transform so many lives,
Yes.
including human and animals. So it will be unfair of me to take more time with my questions. So I'll go to the audience questions now. Nishant Limbachia, he wants to ask you, he says, Namaste, fantastic topic. I agree. I want to ask Kaninika ji, can you point out one structural or governmental change that entrepreneurs voiced or alluded to during your conversation with them? Something that would remove biggest hurdle for them.
In my conversations with people, the focus was what we can do and what solutions we can bring despite the hurdles. And I found that most of these people, they were positive about the various schemes that are coming up right now. So even if it is Make in India, Atmanirbhar or Vocal for Local, it adds a lot of impetus to what they are doing. In terms of hurdles, I just encountered such positive people that, the idea of discussing something that cannot be done was not in the scope of our discussion. So we were, in my interviews, they were talking about what they could do to help, what is their duty, rather than what is something that they can get. And I think that is what differentiates some of these entrepreneurs from typical business minded individuals. It was more about what value can I add to my community or my people? What is it that I can do within the framework that is existing that can help people? So I think that's something that I encountered, which is very inspiring for me. We can look at 100 problems, but I think even if we have one solution to help someone within our means, we should look at that rather than the problems.
Okay, thank you for that, Kaninika. So actually, Nishant's question, it popped up another question in my mind, because you are into learning and development and you were in financial sector. What do you see from that perspective? What is your outlook on these enterprises? Because they are clearly not very starry-eyed about investments and the typical enterprise journey that happens in all your, as described by your Forbes and the whole typical business magazines. Because they don't want to take that path, what would be your outlook or advice to each of these cultural entrepreneurs that you have chronicled, and those that you are still to encounter, or probably those watching this program who want to take up a cultural enterprise? So what would you look at, state as outlook to this sector?
I think this is a sector which is very democratic in the sense that rather than have 100 crore business, they would have 10 crore businesses. And it just helps broad basing wealth. It helps get more people into the economy. And most of the cultural enterprises realize that to be a mass market product, they need to lose out on certain values which they don't want to give up, and it's very dear to them. So the focus or the purpose of their life is not simply wealth generation for themselves. It is the community aspect of it. And when you have that as a purpose, I think the outlook is more holistic. It is more broad. And I think that is wonderful for societies to have that kind of a mission.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for that. My last question before, I don't know how the hour passed. It's 9:56 already.
Yeah.
So people who have more questions, please engage with us on on our Facebook group. So Kaninika, I guess you are a part of the group, right?
Yes.
So do please watch the space for some questions from our viewers right now, as well as those who will view it later on Sunday and later, and what might want to get in touch with you, and please keep answering those
Yes.
queries and engage with the readers. Readers do engage with Kaninika here in our Facebook group, Indic Book Club Facebook group, and please join and be a part of these conversations. So before we part tonight, my last question, Kaninika, uh, is there, like, do you want to, what is your journey beyond Indic Quotient? So is there another book with more of such stories, more such stories coming, or where do you see yourself going?
I am tempted to write another sequel, if we can call it that, because there are many people I have met after this book was published, and especially in certain areas, I can look at a theme, or if I can look at a region, there are specific regional stories which are very inspiring. And also I'm looking at trying to transform this into something for younger people, so people who are teenage or in their pre-teens, something that can help them understand. Because even though there has been a transformation in society, unfortunately a lot of our young children, and they are because of the kind of schooling and a very westernized media and entertainment that they view, they do not know a lot of our Indian legends, stories in a format that is, there are efforts, but it is still limited. So I am hoping that I can do something in for that age group. So these are my product ideas, so that I can think of coming up with and putting forward for readers in the next year or so. And of course, I am looking at constantly being a writer, trying to juggle my work with some bit of writing on the side. So I keep looking at different ideas that could be my next book beyond the Indic Quotient. So still working on a few of them.
That's nice to know, and your journey has been inspiring, Kaninika, and I wish you all the best. Please bring us more such inspiring stories in all the formats you can, and inspire the younger generation, that so that they experience that kind of a paradigm shift in the
Yes.
way our education sector has forced us to think. That needs a whole paradigm shift from
Yes.
especially those in the commerce, as well as those in the humanities. Both of
Yes.
them need to take a step together towards each other, and inspire change from the ground. So that's That's the transformation that I aspire to see, and you are doing your bit wonderfully by chronicling these kind of inspiring stories. So wish you all the very best, and viewers, please keep engaging with us at Indic Book Club Facebook group and various initiatives by Indic Academy. This whole program is brought to you by Indic Academy. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Kaninika.
Thank you so much. It was pleasure talking.
It was my pleasure, was mine too.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.